Elizabeth Holmes repeatedly misled investors, patients, and the media with bold claims about Theranos' revolutionary blood testing technology.
We've made it possible to run comprehensive laboratory tests from a few drops of blood to eliminate the tubes and tubes of blood that traditionally have to be drawn from an arm, and replaced it with the nanotainer.
Astonishingly, many chose to believe her, despite mounting red flags. But the consequences of those lies were severe. Stay with us to uncover the harsh punishment Holmes ultimately faced, which we'll reveal later in the video. Holmes's journey as a so-called visionary began early. At 19, she left Stanford, convinced she could change healthcare with a simple idea: run dozens of blood tests using just a few drops from a finger prick. The promise was less pain, faster results, and lower costs. It sounded like the future, and Holmes positioned herself as the person who would deliver it. But from the start, it's worth asking whether her vision was true innovation or simply a masterclass in image-making. Holmes didn't just pitch revolutionary technology, she carefully crafted the persona of a revolutionary leader. Her upbringing shaped this. Raised in Washington, D.C., Holmes's father worked as a chemical engineer at Burns & Rowe, and later held positions at government agencies like United States Agency for International Development, USAID. Her mother worked on Capitol Hill and with USAID as well. Holmes spoke about wanting to make a difference, often referencing inventors like Thomas Edison. But it was Steve Jobs who became her template. She hired Apple designers to make Theranos devices look sleek, wore black turtlenecks, and spoke in a deliberately hushed tone, choices that weren't accidental. Holmes knew that image mattered, and she leaned into it at every turn. By her early 20s, Holmes was already a skilled storyteller. She convinced her Stanford professor, Channing Robertson, to join her board and help attract early investors. Her vision of a painless, accessible blood test drew attention from venture capitalists and powerful political figures. High-profile names like Henry Kissinger and George Shultz joined the Theranos board, lending the company credibility and opening doors that most young founders could only dream of. Holmes became a fixture on magazine covers, hailed as a tech prodigy and a symbol of Silicon Valley's promise. She made the rounds at conferences, repeating her message about saving lives and transforming healthcare. The story was compelling, and it worked. Inside Theranos, though, the narrative was less polished. Some employees started to notice that the core technology wasn't living up to its billing. The Edison device, which was supposed to run hundreds of tests from a single drop of blood, struggled to deliver reliable results. One employee recalled that when the machines failed, management often filtered out only the correct data and dismissed the rest. Instead of pausing to address the problems, the company pressed forward. Holmes's leadership style, charismatic on the outside, relied heavily on loyalty and secrecy. Employees who raised concerns found themselves ignored or sidelined. Theranos' public image, meanwhile, kept growing. In 2015, Holmes was named to Time's list of the 100 most influential people. Then Vice President Joe Biden toured the Theranos lab and praised her as an inspiration. But while the media celebrated Holmes, internal reports pointed to a different reality. The company's herpes virus test was the only one to receive Food and Drug Administration clearance in 2013. For the rest, the technology fell short, and error reports piled up. Employees described a culture where dissent was unwelcome, and the pressure to meet lofty promises overshadowed any focus on accuracy. Holmes's strategic branding, her signature turtlenecks, her calm presence, her focus on product design, became part of the myth. But the more she doubled down on image, the more the underlying issues at Theranos were ignored. The company's obsession with perfection extended to its labs, investor meetings, and public appearances, but not to the reliability of its technology. Holmes's ambition and belief in her own story kept the momentum going, even as warning signs piled up. As Theranos' reputation soared, the cracks beneath the surface widened. Employees who questioned the technology faced a choice: stay silent or risk everything. The world saw Holmes as a visionary, but those inside the company saw the mounting problems. The difference between the story Holmes told and the reality inside Theranos was about to become impossible to ignore. Inside Theranos, the promise of painless, revolutionary blood testing started to unravel in ways that couldn't be hidden. The The company's Edison machines, which were supposed to be the heart of its operation, repeatedly failed to deliver accurate results. Instead of running the wide range of tests Holmes had promised, the devices produced inconsistent and sometimes dangerously wrong outcomes. Behind closed doors, Theranos secretly relied on Siemens equipment for most of its blood tests, a critical detail hidden from both investors and patients. This deception was at the center of the company's operations, and it was only a matter of time before the consequences reached the outside world. Real patients bore the brunt of these failures. One woman, after taking a Theranos test, was told she might be HIV positive, a diagnosis that was later proven false by standard medical testing. Another woman, who had endured multiple miscarriages, received a Theranos result indicating she had lost another pregnancy. In reality, she later gave birth to a healthy child. These weren't just technical glitches, they were life-altering mistakes that exposed the risks of trusting unproven technology with people's health. Inside the labs, employees began to notice patterns that couldn't be ignored. Erica Chung, a lab assistant, ran her own blood through the system and received a result showing a vitamin D deficiency. Curious and concerned, she had the test redone at a conventional lab, and the new results contradicted Theranos' findings. Chung also saw that when test results were wildly out of range, they were sometimes erased or manually adjusted to seem plausible. Tyler Schultz, working on the diagnostic team, documented how data was filtered and manipulated to hide the flaws. Both Chung and Schultz saw the company's internal reports filling up with errors, but when they tried to raise concerns, they faced a wall of secrecy and intimidation. Theranos didn't just discourage questions, it actively tried to silence those who spoke up. Chung was followed by private investigators after she left the company, and Schultz was pressured by company lawyers to keep quiet. Employees were reminded of strict non-disclosure agreements, and anyone who pushed too hard risked losing their job or worse. The company's leadership wasn't just protecting trade secrets, they were maintaining an illusion that was growing harder to sustain. The cracks became impossible to ignore when Theranos' partnership with Walgreens began to falter. Walgreens had planned to bring Theranos blood tests to stores across the country, but as doubts about the technology grew, the drugstore chain started to back away. Quietly, Walgreens paused its collaboration, and rumors began to circulate in the industry. That's when outside scrutiny intensified. John Carreyrou, a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, started digging into Theranos' claims. With help from whistleblowers like Schultz and Chung, Carreyrou uncovered that Theranos was using third-party machines, and that the Edison device was unreliable. His reporting exposed the company's pattern of deception, drawing the attention of regulators and the public. The story quickly moved beyond Silicon Valley, and the careful image Holmes had built began to collapse. Investors who had once seen Theranos as the next big thing watched as the company's $9 billion valuation evaporated. High-profile backers like Rupert Murdoch and the Walton family lost millions. But for many, the financial losses were only part of the story. The real damage was the betrayal of trust, both to patients whose health was put at risk and to employees who tried to sound the alarm. As the truth about Theranos came out, the stage was set for a reckoning that would reach far beyond the company's walls. The next chapter would unfold in a courtroom with Elizabeth Holmes at the center, facing the consequences of her actions. The trial of Elizabeth Holmes in 2021 became a defining moment for Silicon Valley. It wasn't just about one entrepreneur on trial, it was a public reckoning for an entire culture that had long celebrated bold promises and blurred lines. The courtroom quickly turned into a stage where years of secrecy were examined in detail, and the story of Theranos was picked apart by lawyers, witnesses, and the press. The prosecution built its case around the ways Holmes misled both investors and patients. They brought forward evidence showing that Holmes and her team had added Pfizer's logo to a 55-page report, making it look as if the pharmaceutical giant endorsed Theranos' technology. A Pfizer scientist took the stand and explained that the company found the partnership claims implausible and had advised against working with Theranos. The prosecution also showed that Holmes presented this report to investors as validation, even though it was never approved by Pfizer. This kind of misrepresentation was central to the charges against her. Patient stories played a powerful role in the trial. The jury heard testimony from a woman who received a false positive HIV diagnosis after using a Theranos test. Another patient described how she was told incorrectly that she had miscarried. These cases weren't just statistical errors, They showed the real harm that came from Theranos' failures. The prosecution used these examples to highlight the human cost of Holmes's decisions and the gap between the company's promises and its reality. General James Mattis, a member of the Theranos board, testified that Holmes was his main source of information about the company and its technology. He described being told that the Food and Drug Administration and the World Health Organization had validated Theranos' devices, claims that turned out to be false. The prosecution argued that Holmes knowingly made these statements to keep investors convinced and money flowing. Holmes's defense team tried to shift the blame. They argued that Silicon Valley thrives on risk and that big promises are part of the game. Her lawyers suggested that investors failed to do their homework and that Holmes genuinely believed in her technology. They tried to frame her not as a fraudster, but as someone swept up in the culture of startups, where ambition sometimes outpaces reality. Holmes herself took the stand, drawing media attention with her emotional testimony. She spoke about being raped at Stanford, which she said pushed her to leave school and start Theranos. She also accused her former partner and COO, Ramesh Sunny Balwani, of psychological and sexual abuse, saying he controlled many aspects of her life and decisions. While these revelations added complexity to her story, the jury focused on the evidence of fraud. The verdict was clear. Holmes was convicted on 4 counts related to defrauding investors, 3 counts of wire fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. She was acquitted of patient fraud charges. The sentence, 11 years in prison, which she began serving in May 2023. The trial sent a message to Silicon Valley about the consequences of crossing the line between hope and deception. Holmes's conviction forced the tech world to confront its own values. When the pursuit of innovation turns into a willingness to mislead, the fall can be swift and unforgiving. Her story stands as a warning, and as we reflect on what happened, it's worth asking what lessons can be learned from ambition that soars too close to the sun. Holmes's conviction exposed a pattern that goes beyond one company. The Theranos scandal shows what happens when hype and the fake-it-till-you-make-it mentality replace real evidence. Over-promising, hiding flaws, and prioritizing image over substance can attract investors, but regulators and the media will eventually demand proof. When trust is lost, it's nearly impossible to rebuild. Unchecked hype without verification erodes more than just a company's reputation, it damages the foundation of trust that any business depends on. Aspiring founders must remember that transformational visions need rock-solid proof, or idealism can become a dangerous myth.